Chapter 15. In the morning, after roll call and breakfast were over, they got their first lesson at the midden. "Commandant!" a man called across the wire fence from the man's camp. "Commandant coming!" A woman took up the cry. "He is coming." Rivka said urgently to Hannah and Shifra, who were standing near the cauldrons where they had been helping dish out the watery soup. "Do what I do." Rivka put her hands up to her mouth as if shouting, but instead made a penetrating clucking noise by placing her tongue against the roof of her mouth. From all over the camp came the same clicking, as if crazed crickets had invaded the place. The small children, alerted by the sound, came scrambling from everywhere. They raced toward the midden heap behind the barracks. Even the camp guards joined in, alternately clucking and laughing, waving the children on toward the garbage pile. The largest children carried the littlest ones in their arms. There were about 30 in all. Hannah watched, amazed at their speed. When they got to the midden, they skinned out of their clothes and dove naked into the dump. Suddenly, Hannah noticed that one of the camp babies was still cradled in a wash tub. Without stopping to ask, she grabbed it up and ran with the child into the middle of the midden. Garbage slipped along her bare legs. She waded through a mixture of old rags, used bandages, the emptied-out waste of the slop buckets. The midden smell was overwhelming. Though she had already gotten used to the pervasive camp smell, a cloudy musk that seemed to hang over everything, a mix of sweat and fear and sickness, and the ever-present smoke that stained the sky. The smell in the midden was worse. She closed her eyes and lowered herself into the garbage, the baby clutched in her arms. When the all-clear clucking finally came, Hannah emerged from the heap with the baby, who was cooing. She scrubbed them both off with a rag until the child's mother, Leah, came running over. "I will murder that Elihu Krupnik. Where is he? He is supposed to take her in. And look, you left her clothes on. They are filthy." Leah's face was contorted with anger. "No thanks?" Rivka asked. "Leah, she saved the baby." Leah stared for a moment at Hannah as if seeing her for the first time. Then, as if making an effort, she smiled. "I will organize some water," she said, leaving the filthy baby in Hannah's filthy arms. "That means thank you," Rivka said. Hannah stared after Leah. "I think," she said slowly, "I think I prefer the water to the thanks." That night, she washed out her dress with a cup of water, hanging it like a curtain from her sleeping shelf. Now she understood why the children had all stripped off their clothes, dropping them like bright rags on the sandy ground. She'd worried that the clothing would be gaudy signals to the commandant, but clearly he already knew, as did the guards, where the children hid. It was all some kind of awful game, but she'd been too scared to stop and too shy to undress out in the open like that, especially while the memory of her naked hours waiting for the shower still brought a blush to her face, especially as the guards, some in their late teens, had already been laughing nearby. As she fell asleep, she was sure the smell of the midden had gotten into her pores, that there was not enough water in the camp, in all of Poland, to wash her clean. The days quickly became routine. Roll call, breakfast, work, lunch, work, supper, work. The meals were all watery potato soup and occasionally bread, hard and crusty. Then they had a precious hour before they were locked in their barracks for the night. The work was the mindless sort. Some of it was meant to keep the camp itself running, cleaning the barracks, the guards' houses, the hospital, the kitchen, cutting and hauling wood for the stoves, building more barracks, more privies. But most of the workers were used in the sorting shed, stacking the clothing and suitcases and possessions stolen from the prisoners, dividing them into piles to be sent back to Germany. Still, Hannah was glad of the routine. As long as she knew what to expect, she wasn't frightened. What was more frightening was the unknown, the occasional corpse hanging on the gates without an explanation, the swift kick by the Blokova for no reason. She and Shifra were set to work with Rivka in the kitchen hauling water in large buckets from the pump, spooning out the meager meals, washing the giant cauldrons in which the soup cooked, scrubbing the walls and floors. It was hard work, harder than Hannah could ever remember doing. Her hands and knees held no memory of such work. It was endless and repetitive, but it was not without its rewards. Occasionally, they were able to scrape out an extra bit of food for themselves and the little ones while cleaning the pots. Burnt pieces of potatoes that had stuck to the bottom. Even burnt pieces tasted wonderful, better even than beef. She thought she remembered beef. "She gave the Blokova a gold ring she organized to get you in here," Leah explained, wiping her hands on a rag and nodding her head in Rivka's direction. Leah was the head of the kitchen crew. Her arms were always splotchy and stained, but it was a good job, for she could keep her baby with her. Otherwise, that one. And she spit on the ground to show her disapproval of the three-fingered woman. She would have had you hauling wood with the men, and you would never have lasted because you are a city girl. It is in your hands, not a country girl like Shifra. We outlast you every time. When Hannah tried to thank Rivka, the girl only smiled and shrugged away the thanks. My mother, may she rest in peace, always said, Anima ish nicht kein Geber. A taker is not a giver, and a giver is not a taker either. Keep your thanks, and hand it on. She said it gently, as if embarrassed. Hannah understood her embarrassment and didn't mention it again, but she did try to pass it on. She began saving the softer insides of the bread, slipping it to Reuven when she could. Yitzhak's little boy was so thin and sad-looking, still wondering where his sister had gone, that she could not resist him. She even tried giving him her whole bread, meal after meal, until Gittel found out. You cannot help the child by starving yourself, Gittel said. Besides, with those big blue eyes, he will have many to help him. And that smile. Hannah bit her lip. Those big blue eyes and the luminous, infrequent smiles reminded her of someone she couldn't name. But you are still a growing girl, Kaya. You must take care of you. She folded Hannah's hands around the bread and pushed her away from Reuven. Go, finish your kitchen duties. I will take Reuven with me. Hannah turned away reluctantly, as if she had somehow failed Rivka. As she did so, she saw that Gittel had given the child her own bread, and half her soup besides. It was on the third day in the camp that Commandant Brewer came again. This time, word was whispered around the camp, for a choosing. His black car drove right up the middle of the camp, between the rows of barracks, the flag on the aerial snapping merrily. The driver got out, opened the rear door, and stood at attention. What is a choosing? Hannah asked Rivka out of the side of her mouth as they waited beside the cauldrons they were cleaning. She didn't know why, but she could feel sweat running down her dress, even though it was a cool day, as if her body knew something it wasn't telling her mind. There was no movement from the midden pile where the bright shorts and blouses of the children marked their passage. The commandant strode past without giving the dump a glance. Rivka hissed Hannah quiet and ran a finger across her own throat, the same signal that the peasants had made in the fields when the cattle cars passed them by. Hannah knew that signal. She just didn't know what it meant exactly. She shivered. The commandant was a small, handsome man, so clean-shaven his face seemed burnished. His cheekbones had a sharp edge, and there was a cleft in his chin. He stopped for a moment in front of Hannah, Rivka, and Shifra. Hannah felt sweat run down her sides. The commandant smiled, pinched Rivka's cheek, then went on. Behind him was a man with a clipboard and a piece of paper. They walked without stopping again, straight to the far end of the compound. The door banged behind them ominously. Rivka let out a ragged breath and turned to Hannah. Anyone who cannot get out of bed today will be chosen, she said. Her voice was soft but matter-of-fact. Chosen for what? Hannah asked, though she'd already guessed. Chosen for processing. You mean chosen for death? Hannah said. Then suddenly she added, Hansel, let out your finger that I may see if you are fat or lean. Do not use that word aloud, Rivka cautioned. Which word? Asked Hannah. Finger? Fat? Lean? Rivka sighed. Death, she said. But why? Asked Shifra, her pale face taking color from the question. Why will some be chosen? Because they cannot work, said Rivka. And work, her voice became very quiet, and for the first time, Hannah heard a bitterness in it. Because work mocked Frey. And because he enjoys it, added Leah, coming over to see why they were not working. But do not let them hear you use the word death. Do not let them hear you use the word corpse. Not even if one lies at your feet, Rivka warned. A person is not killed here, but chosen. They are not cremated in the ovens. They are processed. There are no corpses, only pieces of dreck, only schmutz, rags. But why? Asked Hannah. Why? Leah said. Because what is not recorded cannot be blamed. Because that is what they want. So that is how it must be. Quickly, back to work. No sooner had they begun scrubbing again than the door to the hospital opened and Commandant Brewer emerged, still smiling, but broader this time. As he and his aide passed by, Hannah could see the paper on the clipboard was now covered with numbers and names. The commandant reminded her of someone. A picture, perhaps. A moving picture. She'd seen a smiling face like that somewhere. Dr. Mengele, she said suddenly. The angel of Auschwitz. As suddenly as she knew it, the reference was gone. No, Rivka said, puzzled. His name is Brewer. Why did you say that? I told you she says strange things, Schiffer put in. Hannah looked down at her hands. They were trembling. I don't know why I said it. Am I becoming a Muslim? Am I going mad? No one answered. Gito had been working in the sorting shed where mountains of clothes and shoes, mounds of books and toys and household goods from the suitcases and bags were divided up. It was also the place where men and women could talk together, so there was a quick, quiet trading of information from the women's camp to the men's and back again. That night, Gito shared the news with the others of the Zugangi barracks. All the clothes and shoes in good condition go straight to Germany, and we get what is left. But look what I got you, Kayale. She held up a blue scarf. Organized. You organized it, Tante Gito, Schiffer cried out, her hands up with delight. The women all laughed, the first time such a sound had rippled through the barracks since they had arrived. Yes, she organized it. Gito looked up, pursed her lips for a moment, then smiled. All right, I organized it. How did you do it, Gito? Someone called. You can bet she did not ask, came an answer. Gito nodded, stretching the scarf between her hands. Some freita shile strife. Hannah translated mentally. If you ask permission, the answer is no. She remembered suddenly another phrase from somewhere else almost like it. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. She had a brief memory of it printed on something, like a shirt. So, said Esther's mother, a self-satisfied look on her face, we may be Zugangi, but we already know how to organize. Esther looked longingly at the blue scarf and hummed quietly to herself. Gito handed the scarf to Hannah. To replace the blue ribbons, she said softly. The blue ribbons? For a moment, Hannah couldn't remember them. Then she did. And because today is your birthday, Gito added. Her birthday? Cried Schiffer. You did not tell me. Hannah shook her head. My birthday is in the winter, in February. The word sat strangely on her mouth. What nonsense is this? Asked Gito, her hands on her hips. And what kind of word is February? They taught you to count the days by the Christian calendar in Lublin? She turned to look at the women who were circled around them. You think I do not know my own niece's birthday? And did I send a present every year? Of course you know, a gray-haired woman called out. I remember the day she was born, said another. You told me in the synagogue, all happy with the idea. You were only 13. You said, and already an aunt. So, Gito said, turning to face Hannah. Her certainty overrode Hannah's own. Besides, she asked herself, who knew what day it was, what year, in this place? Thank you, Gito, she whispered. It's the best present I've ever had, I think. The only one I remember, anyway. Oh, my dear child, Gito said, pulling her close. Thank God that your father and mother are not alive to see you now. Caught in Gito's embrace, Hannah suddenly remembered the little house in the shtetl and the big embracing arms of Shmuel. What of Shmuel? She said. And Yitzhak, are they, well? Gito sat on a low shelf bed and pulled Hannah down next to her. The circle of women closed in, eager for news. Gito nodded. Now, listen. Shmuel is working with the crew that cuts wood, but it is all right. It is what he knows how to do, and he is strong. With him are Yitzhak the butcher and Gadawaya and Nathan Bardennik and their cousin Nemuel. Zadik the cobbler is doing what he has always done, making shoes and belts. They have a cobbler shop there. He is making a fine pair of riding boots for the commandant, size 5. That is a woman's size, Esther's mother said with a laugh. Yes, and they have made up a little rhyme about it. Listen, I will tell it to you. Brewer wears a lady's shoe, what a cock-a-doodle-doo. The woman began to giggle. Hannah didn't understand the humor. Gito held up her hand and the laughter stopped. And from Vyosk, Naftali the goldsmith is making rings on order for all the SS men. He is a very sick man, but they like his work so much they are leaving him alone. And where does he get the gold? Asked a woman in a stained green dress. From the valises, idiot, someone else answered. From our fingers, Faye said suddenly, the first time she had spoken in days. She held up her hands so that everyone could see that they were bare. From our ears. From our dead, Gitto whispered. Hannah wondered whether anyone else heard her. What about the others? Esther's mother asked. I do not remember anything more, Gitto said softly. What about the rabbi? Asked the woman with a hair lip. What about Rabbi Baruch? Gitto did not answer. Faye knelt down in front of her, putting her hands on Gitto's skirt. We are sisters, Gitto, she said. I am your brother's wife. You must tell me about my father. Gitto closed her eyes and pursed her lips. For a long moment she did not speak, but her mouth opened and shut as if there were words trying to come out. At last she said, Josen, yesterday, Baruch Dayanim. Faye opened her mouth to scream. The woman in the green dress clapped her hand over Faye's mouth, stifling the scream, pulling her onto the sandy floor. 3 other women wrapped their arms around her as well, rocking back and forth with her silent sobs. Josen, Gitto said explosively, her eyes still closed, along with Zedek the tailor, the Bachan, the butcher from Vyosk, and 24 others, and the render. Why? Asked Hannah. The rabbi was in the hospital. His heart was broken. Zedek, too. He had been beaten almost to death. The Bachan because he chose to go. They say he said, This is not a place for a fool, where there are idiots in charge, and the others whose names I do not remember for crimes I do not know. And the render, with all his money he could not buy his way out? Asked Esther's mother. In this place he is just a Jew, like the rest of us, said Gitto, like the least of us. He's a schmutt now, said Hannah, remembering Rivka's word. Gitto opened her eyes and slapped Hannah's face without warning. That may be camp talk out there, but in here we say the prayer for the dead properly, like good Jews. Gitto the bear, someone murmured. Hannah looked up, hand on her smarting cheek. She could not find the speaker, so spoke to them all. Gitto is right, she said, her cheek burning. Gitto is right. Gitto began reciting the Kaddish, rocking back and forth on the sleeping shelf with the sonorous words, and the prayer was like the tolling of a death bell. The rest joined her at once. Hannah found she was saying the words along with them, even though her mind didn't seem to have any memory of the prayer. Yish Gadal, Vyish Kadash, Shmei Rabu,